Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Terumais, Pedig Beis, Halacha Aleph. We are mamish in the middle of the Mishnah. We are on top of Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph. Let's quickly review the second chapter. The first Mishnah began by telling us the rule that lechatchila ein toirmin min hatohir al hatamei. And that's a chiddush, because you would think that if I have two piles of the same item, one is tahir, one is tamei, and truma that's tameya has very little value to the kohen, it's not asur bahana, but all the kohen can do is burn it and have benefit from the fuel. So you would think that it's to the benefit of the kohen for me to give truma from the tahir for the tamei. Nevertheless, the rule is, again, lechatchila ein toirmin min hatohir al hatamei. However, ve'im tarmu, like the Mishnah said, trumasan truma. Now, really, to properly introduce this topic, there is a big machlokes between the Rishonim. Let's speak about the one representing one side, the Rambam, who holds, as we will learn today in the Gemara, various sources from the Torah for it. He understands these sources not to be an asmachta, but they are a bona fide din Torah. And even though one would argue that by a din Torah there should not be lechatchila b'diavad, that's not always the case. In other words, midoiraisa ein tarmin, but ve'im tarmu trumasan truma. And the Rash, I'm talking about the Rishon, not the Rash Rilio, Rabbeinu Shimshon in the Shnayis. The Rash says this is a rabbinic law, and all of the psukim that we're going to learn today is only a asmachta. You understand what that means, Aviv? That means that even though the Gemara quotes a pasuk to back up a certain rule, many times it's really a rabbinic rule, and the Chachamim also found it important to find a hint in the Torah. But that's not the meaning when Hashem gave those words. It's not what Hashem meant to write with those words. It's something that we use to remember the din derabanan. And why would the Chachamim say that ein toirmin min hatohir al hatamei? And let's just repeat what we said yesterday. That's because, remember, since Truma Gedoyla has to be given, min hamukaf means min hasamuchloi. Min hasamuchloi really doesn't only mean it should be near one the other, but they should be adjacent, touching each other. If you have tahir and tamei, if you will allow yourself to give truma from one for the other, even in the direction that's beneficial for the kohen, from the tahir for the tamei, you're going to have to bring the two piles to touch each other, min hamukov. Then the tamei ones will make some of the tahir ones tamei as well. So to prevent that, the Chachamim say, ein toirmin min hatohir al hatamei. And that's the way we explained the exceptions that we learned yesterday. The Mishnah gave us three exceptions, just repeating one of the three. They're all the same. That if you have some sort of pressed cake of figs, it was common. They would take figs and they would press them all together. Some of them are tahir, some of them are tamei. Now let's already speak it out right now. Liquid and solids are very different. Liquids halachically are considered one unit, which were to mean that if I have a gallon as big as this room, huge, filled with liquid, if a source of tuma touches one side of this gathering of water, of liquid, everything becomes tamei, right? It's one thing. If something tamei touches this, but it touches part of it, all of it becomes tamei because it's one unit. But when we have things that are solid, that are not one unit, like a pile of grain, little kernels, every kernel is separate from the other. They're together. If a source of tuma touches one of these kernels, we don't always say, all of them are tamei. No, we're going to say the ones that immediately touched the source of tuma became tamei. Now we have to know all of the rules of how tuma goes down the line. You go from an av to a rishon to a sheni, by truma to a shlishi, by kachim even to a revi. At some point, it won't be tamei anymore. And that's the case of the Mishnah. So you have a conglomerate, you have something that's already tightly squeezed together. Part of it is tahir, part of it is tamei. Here the Mishnah says you are allowed to give from the tahir part for all of it, including for the tamei part. You got it? And the Rash says that's the reason. It's not a din Torah. It's the logic. There's a rabbinic fear that you will make more tuma. You're not making more tuma. It's already min hamukaf. The damage, whatever damage was done already. It's not going to become worse. So therefore, adarabba, give the kohen that which the kohen benefits most, which is tahor. This is where we left off. Now, we're going to, after these three exceptions, the Mishnah now will discuss the rule in the opposite direction, which is that you're not allowed to give a truma min hatamei al hatohar. However, over here, even b'di'evid, even if you did it, it's not so straightforward. If you did it, you did it. Here we differentiate between shogeg and mezid. We already quoted this rule in the previous chapter. If you did it v'shogeg, shogeg would mean you didn't know it's tamei. Then post facto it's effective. But if you knew that it's tamei, and nevertheless you separated from the tamei, not only for the tamei, which is what you have to do, but also for the tahor, which is what you should not have done. B'mezid midrabanan, what you did is not done. Ein truma say truma. You have to give truma again. And once the Mishnah will mention a halacha in which we differentiate shogeg and mezid, the Mishnah will enumerate other halachas not related to our topic, in which we have this difference between a shogeg and a mezid. Okay, now we're going to start the Gemara today. The Gemara is going to go back to the basic rule that ein toidemin min hatahoid al hatame, and even according to the Rash, right, that it's a din derabanan, we're going to learn the asmachta, we're going to learn the sources, and the Gemara basically in today's daf will come to the following concept. Now, it's amazing how the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, when they speak about same rules, they have different expressions for the same rule. What we have in the Bavli, Beloshin, im einoi inyan lezeh, teneyu inyan lezeh, which is a phenomena, which means that there are times, very rare, that the Torah teaches us a halacha in one area, and this halacha actually does not apply to that area. But since it's there, and we know it cannot apply to the area in which it's written, we apply it to another area. Im einoi inyan lezeh, teneyu inyan lezeh. And that's an anomaly. Why is it an anomaly? There's nothing wrong for us learning a halacha in ground zero, what I like to call grounds in the source, and then to say, now that the Torah revealed it in halacha aleph becomes a teacher to beis, to gimel, to dalet. That's normal. We learn one from the other. And that's, in the words of the Yerushalmi, is lemedim umelamdim. Lemedim umelamdim. In our case, we're going to be constantly going back and forth to Trumas Meiser and to Truma Gedoyla. They're both Truma. Most of the dinim that we have been learning in the previous chapter about Truma Gedoyla actually was learned from a word in Psukim by Trumas Meiser in Parshas Koirach. And what we say is that Hashem revealed a law concerning Trumas Meiser. Now that we know it about Trumas Meiser, now we say, Truma Gedoyla and Trumas Meiser is both Truma. So now that we know that this has to be so by Trumas Meiser, the same will be by Truma Gedoyla. That's called Lemedim Umalamdim. However, as we'll see today, that there are two halachas regarding the laws of Truma that we apply to Truma Gedoyla. One of them is this rule, Ein Toidemin min hatohoid al hatamei. And the source, whether L'Rambam, it's takla the source. Whether L'Rash, it's only an asmachta. Doesn't matter. The Chachamim gave us as an asmachta. The source will be in Trumas Meiser. And this rule does not apply in Trumas Meiser, as we already learned yesterday in the Mishnah. Let's go with the Rash. Since Trumas Meiser does not have to be given min hamukaf, and we already learned in the previous chapter, why not? Because you give it exact. The whole din of min hamukaf is because you're only giving it by approximation. Trumas Meiser has to be exactly 10%. If you count that I have 5 here and you count 5 over there, and you now know, you Levi, that you have to give from the total of 10-1, I don't care if they're not in a samuch. Who cares? I know exactly what it is. I know exactly what I have to give. So by Trumas Meiser, you are allowed to give min hatohoid al hatami. The source comes from Trumas Meiser. So that will be the whole thing. So you're going to see that by that he milamedes ve'ena lemeda. the source is in Trumas Meiser. It teaches us the rule for Truma Gedoyla, but it itself will not allow that law to be applied to it. And we'll see that there are basically three halachas that we'll speak on Daf Tezayin. Two of the three follow this unusual rule, not that lemedim umalamdim. No, he melamedes ve'eino lameda. But the third halacha that, God willing, will conclude today's daf with will be, no, there's a halacha that's written in Trumas Meiser. It teaches us the rule for Trumas Meiser, and that's the norm. And then we say, since this applies to Trumas Meiser, it also will apply to Truma Gedoyla. That is today's daf. Daf Tezayin, Amud Aleph. By the dot. Okay, the Mishnah gave us the three exceptions where we say that you are allowed to take min hatohid al hatamei. The first one was on the eagle shel devela, shenitma miktsasai. Second case was aguda shel yerek. It's already bundled together. You had a bundle. Some of them is toir, some of them is tamei. The third was you have a arema, which means you have a pile of grain. It's already piled together. In the case where some toir, some tamei, you could give min hatohid al hatamei. Actually, next daf will actually question, should you give or must you give? Now, may you give or must you give? We'll deal with that next daf. But coming back to the three exceptions, and now says the Mishnah, hold on. Don't expand the exception where you should not. Hoyu shnei igulim, if you have two round cakes of pressed figs, they're separate. Or you have two agudois, or if you have shtei aremois, and achas tohoida v'achas tameya, don't make any exceptions. One is toid, all of it. One is all of it tamei. That's the din of the Mishnah. That lechatchila lo yitra mizel zeh. It makes a lot of sense. It makes so much sense that the Gemara is going to wonder, why did the Mishnah even have to repeat it? I mean, this is mamish what we learned in the Reisha. It's self-understood. But we'll get to that when we get to the Gemara. Okay. At kan, we keep on saying this rule, the rule of the Chachamim, the rule of the Tanakama, the Stam Mishnah. Aber Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, Rabbi Eliezer holds that yes, toirmin min hatohid al hatamei. Now I want you to know that even though when you read the Mishnah, it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer is completely arguing with the Tanakama, and the Gemara will limit the area where they argue. Rabbi Eliezer is not going to turn out to be as, let's say, lenient as it sounds like, but let's learn the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with this rule. We'll see where that yes, toirmin min hatoir al hatam. And again, that would make sense. Mitzad sheni, if you have both are tevel. You have to give you have a total of 100. You're going to have to give 2 to the kohen. Chaval to give to the kohen 2 if one or both are tamei. Let the kohen get that which is tahor. Okay. Now says the Mishnah. Now we're going to go to the opposite direction. The opposite direction makes a lot more sense. You don't need to know the lumdis of min hamukov. You have 2 piles, 50-50 apples. One is tahor, one is tamei. Can you give everything from the tamei? Basically, you want to give from inferior for superior. This is basically what you're doing. Mamish inferior. We're not talking about grade A, grade B. Good food or glatmark, grade B. We're talking about tamei tahor. Here he can eat, here he can only use the fuel, the most. Says the Mishnah, Ein toirmin min hatamei al hator. Now, what happens post facto? So here it depends. If a person violated, then he gave truma min hatamei al hator. So if he did it b'shoigeg, shoigeg means, listen to my words, he never knew that it was tamei. So post facto, he never knew. Post facto, we say truma, say truma.
Oh, wait, why don't we call this stealing also, even though it's shogeg from the Kohen?
Because we view it only as inferior to superior.
But it's a big loss.
I know. And okay, let me.
Well, one second. Is Kayvon asking because we learned before by the oil where he has to process more is considered stealing? And here we're just giving him Is that what you're asking, Kiva?
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Gezel Hashevet. Okay, very good. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Let's look inside the Rashadilio. The Rashadilio, the right column, 3 lines from the top. This is the source from where we learn that if you give biblically from inferior for superior, right, causing the kohen to lose, even though it's a sin, but what you did is effective. Where do we get that from? I'm not answering. So why did they say Gezel Hashevet? What's the difference? We'll hold that a second. But let's read it inside. Look inside the Rashadilio. B'shoyeg truma say truma. The farash tama. The source for this is actually in Bavli Yavam is Daf Peites Amid Beis Kid Rabbi Law, like Rabbi Law. You see that Aviv? You see the Rashadilio? Get used to it. To Amar Rabbi Law. Minayin letoidim min harro al hayafe. In other words, we are putting together Tomei al hatoin. This is the general inferior for superior. That post facto, biblically, and then sometimes even rabbinically, right? Even rabbinically, b'shoigeg. Shetruma say truma. It's amazing how so many dinim are learned from Trumas Meiser. Because it says by Trumas Meiser, when the Levi is to give 10% from the Levi's Meiserishan to the Kohen, that veloisisu olav chet, the Levi will not bear a sin when baharimchem eschel boy mimeni, when he gives the best to the Kohen. Period. Which implies that if he gives the worst from what he has to the Kohen, he's bearing a sin. So says the Gemara in the Bavli, if what he did is ineffective, he wouldn't be bearing a sin. Im einoi kadosh, if what he did, which was so wrong, right? Let's go to Kevin's words. He's stealing. If it's so wrong, if Hashem would therefore react by saying what you did is ineffective, then a siyas chet lama, it wouldn't be a sin. Tainik would say it will be effective. Sin implies that if you do it in the wrong direction, if you give min hara al hayafe, or in narrowly min hatome al hatoid, you sinned, but it's effective. Okay. Now coming back over here. Okay,
Can I just make one comment on this?
Sure.
That I think we all need to be aware of, is that with Truma Gedela, the whole 2% is that's not the actual requirement according to the Torah.
Correct.
So the Torah has even 1 grain that could, in theory, solve the.
But the 1 grain has to be from the grain. The 1 grain I cannot give from one item to the other.
I'm just saying, so the way Kayvon's looking, like you're stealing because it's a lesser value. It is a lesser value, true, but it is something. And according to the biblical requirement, you just need something to be Truma Gedela.
That's true.
I don't know.
That's true.
That's the way I see it.
That's true. In other words, let me say, you cannot give from one min on another min, from one type on another type. And that will be where is the cutoff point? Where we say that it's so inferior, it's not, this great B. It's like a different thing. And we don't say it. Now, midoiraisa, it's always going to be post facto sinful, which means it's going to be effective. Midrabanan, so if you did it b'shoigeg, the Chachamim left the law the way it is midoiraisa. Trumasai, truma. But if a person did it mezid, which means you knew it was tamei, and nevertheless you separated all from the tamei and the tahar. Again, here we have words that will leave for the Gemara to elaborate, because up until now the words of the Mishnah was ein truma say truma. Here the Mishnah says the words lo yasav lo klum. You didn't do anything, you didn't accomplish anything. That the Gemara is going to address what did Rabbi mean when he changed his formulation. Sounds like stronger. What you did is garnish mit nisht. Anyways, this is a gzeira midrabanan for when you did it b'mezid. Now, says the Mishnah, v'chein bein Levi, shoyloi meiser tevel. In other words, meiser tevel means that the Levi has meiser ishin, from which trumas meiser was not yet removed. Hoya mafresh olav v'hoylech, and he's separating this for trumas meiser, which was not uncommon. In other words, it was common that a Levi would get it from different people. He would get meiser ishin. Let's say the Levi got from Reuven, he got a pile of meiser ishin. The pile has 10 pounds of a product. In his mind, he's going to use the whole 10 pounds for trumas meiser, And as he's getting other Maaseh editions of this item, he keeps on giving from this pile, which happens to be Tameh, to the Kohen. And in other words, he's giving min hatamei al new gifts that are tahor. So here again, the same rule, which is ideal. That shoygeg, if he did not know that which he is giving as trumas meiser for other meiser rishons was tamei, he didn't know. So then masha asui. However, if he knew and he's nevertheless giving it, mezid, again the same words, loy asa klum. Even over here, not lo yasa viloy klum, but lo yasa klum. I don't know. I didn't learn this so far ahead to see if the Gemara even is medayik on that smaller difference. But bottom line is, shogeg mezit, we're machalik. However,
It seems like a major difference to lose out that extra no.
Yeah, it could be. No, I'm not. I know that. No, it's a difference. I just don't know if the Gemara is going to discuss it. Let's wait. Let's wait till next week. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, the way we will learn Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda is qualifying. He's limiting. He's defining shoygig. Rabbi Yehuda Omer that im hoya yodeya by metchila, if the owner of the product, whether it's the Yisrael with the Tevel, whether it's the Levi with the Maaseh edition, if he once knew that this part, which ultimately he gave to the Kohen, he knew in the past that it was Tameh, even though he currently forgot that it's Tameh, af al pi shehu shoygeg now, we don't say shoygeg based on were you aware of it while you were doing it. We say shoygeg only if you never knew it was Tameh. There are certain things that if you knew, it's so expected for you to remember that forgetting, and we all know that, is forgetting a shoygeg, is forgetting a mezid. If a person has Alzheimer's, then it might be that's different. We're speaking about a healthy person. Sheshigakas Talmud oila zodin. We have a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. People say, why is that? Because you should have reviewed. In other words, certain things, if it would have been important for you, you wouldn't have forgotten. Here, Rabbi Yehuda says, is also loy asa klum. As let's read the Marafulda. I know there's different ways of reading this, Rabbi Yehuda. The Marafulda says that im hoyedeya by mitchila, 8 lines from the top in the Marafulda. Chu tevel oitame. Afal pisha b'shasha taram oyeshoygeg v'shachach. Chu tevel oitame. Even though he forgot later. We call that, Rabbi Yehuda calls that, and we're going to go to Rabbi Yehuda. No one is arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. He's just going deeper into the definition of shoygeg and mezid. He calls this a shoygeg that's koroiv lemezid. Why? The person should have made an effort not to forget because he knew how important it is not to give minatame al hatoid, how important it is for a kohen not to eat truma tamei. Imagine the mitchell that happens if he forgets. No, he thought it started. Which would mean that when he gave it to the kohen, he told the kohen, this is tar. Which means the kohen would end up eating truma tameya. In other words, the whole thing, you're not taking the whole thing serious. So we're saying if you knew and you forgot, it's called the shoygeg. Okay, now the final part of the Mishnah will be me'inyan le'inyan. We're changing topics, but we are speaking about halachos in which we differentiate between shoygeg and mezid. So case number 1. Hamat bil kelim b'Shabbos. This is a gavaldik topic that we have in Hilchos Shabbos. That mida eiraisa, one of the lamed tes malachas, is called makeh bepatish / tikkun mana, something that's unusable, that you fix, that you bring to its state of now you can use it, is asan mida eiraisa. But you know when aviv it's asan mida eiraisa, if its brokenness and therefore its fixing was something physical. What happens if something begashmius is already in its completed state, but because of a halacha, you cannot yet use it? As an example, a keli that belonged to a non-Jew may not be used by a Jew if the Jew owns it prior to taking it to the mikveh. When you take it to the mikveh doesn't change any physical part of the utensil. But prior to which, it was an untoivel keli, now it's a toivel keli. Or if a keli is tamei with other tumas, which we don't practice nowadays. Same idea. And you want to eat food that's tahor. For that, you have to take the keli when you go to the mikveh. So the rule is that hamat bil kelim b'Shabbos. The problem is a rabbinic problem. And that's the big rule that tikkun mana, if you're fixing something whose problem and solution is not discernible to the eye. No one, you can't see whether it didn't go to the mikveh, whether it did go to the mikveh. It's asur midrabanan. Well, if you did it b'shoigeg again would mean, let's go b'shoigeg is you never knew that you're not allowed to do it. Here b'shoigeg doesn't mean you didn't know it's tamei. If you didn't know it's tamei, you wouldn't take it to the mikveh. But you didn't know you're not allowed to do it. So then post facto you can use it. But umezid, if you knew you're not allowed to do it and you nevertheless did it, people say, if the guy is frum, if he's religious, some people are religious in one area and not religious in another area. Obviously, this is a person that doesn't care that much about Shabbos, but when it comes to Tum and Tara, the person is very cautious. These things are common until today. We are all that way to some degree, and no one is perfect. People have their mitzvah and where they're very careful in, and mitzvahs in which they need growth. And you can't tell a person, why are you doing this if you're not doing that? That's the wrong attitude. Now, what's amazing is how Rabbi separated and joined things together. So taking it to the mikvah has its own stanza. The next is ma'aser and mevashel. I don't know the reason. Now, ma'aser is the rabbanan, which means if I have untithed food, tithing it is tikkun mana. I'm fixing it. I'm making it edible. But again, its problem, tevel, is not something discernible to the eye. Its solution is also not something. It's not like I had a keli that had a hole in it and I stuffed a hole, right? And now I can fill it up with liquid and the liquid won't leak out. The issue of being ma'asir, like taking something to the mikvah, is a rabbinic, the rabbanon issue. Mevashel is a bona fide isur doiraisa. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. Yet, Rebbe put them together. For some reason, he didn't put matbil, ma'asir, mevashel. I don't know why. Matbil is one category. Ma'asir, mevashel, another category. Now, I want you to know by mevashel, it's a three-way machloikes tanoim. I'm not going to repeat it right now because it's late. And it comes up many times, relatively many times. Our Mishnah is only following Shitas Rav Meir, who simplifies the issue of what happens if you cook something on Shabbos by simple shogeg mezid. He doesn't speak about the time that you would need b'chdei sheya'asu. He doesn't speak about to differentiate between the person who did it versus other people. All of these things we do have in halacha. Our Mishnah is following one opinion. Rav Meir, simple. If you did it b'shoigeg, that means either you were ma'aser produce on Shabbos, or if you cooked food on Shabbos, then you can eat it. Even the guy that cooked it, he doesn't say who can. And mezid, if it was done on mezid, in either case, then lo yoichal. That's the weiter.
So when it's shogeg, is it also the same thing as mevatel, where you don't know that you're not allowed to do it?
So Aviv is making the following point, that I want to speak up more details. Okay, but that when it comes to shoigeg on Shabbos, there's what we call shigegas Shabbos or shigegas malacha. These are foundational rules. Both of them are under the umbrella of shoigeg. One means you don't know it's Shabbos. One means you know it's Shabbos, but you didn't know that you're not allowed to do it. So all Aviv is saying is that if we're going to apply Rabbi Yehuda's logic over here, it's going to get a little bit. It's going to get a little bit evolved, and we're not going to do this right now. I think the Gemara will do some of it. The Bavli for sure would go work that out. How would we apply it over here? To say that you never knew it was Shabbos, you forgot it's Shabbos, how do you even apply that? But you didn't know that 7 days ago was Shabbos. At some point, Shigaga Shabbos, you knew and you forgot. Someone's mother-in-law forgets what day it is. Someone over here themselves sometimes forgets what day it is. It depends on if before coffee or after coffee. Okay, let's leave the thing open.
So Shigas Malacha is a better way of looking at this, correct?
Shigas Malacha is a much better. It's much easier, in my opinion, because it's Shaykh that an Amma Aretz never knew that you can't do. You can't be Maaser. To say that a person didn't know what Shabbos, it's already like you forgot. But anyways, come back over here. Now the next group, Hanoiteya b'Shabbos. Nitiya b'Shabbos is one of the Lamates Malachas. It's also biblically to plant on Shabbos. And here we're going a little bit beyond, because up until now, when we said lo yoichal doesn't mean you have to destroy it, right? Let's go back to the previous stanza. A person cooked on Shabbos, according to Rav Meir, he did it the mezid. You can't eat the food. Do you have to destroy the food? No. Here we go even more, that if you plant a tree on Shabbos, b'shoigeg, you can leave it in the ground, and therefore benefit. But mezid, yakoid, you got to uproot it. And it makes a lot of sense, because when it comes to food, when the Chachamim say, right? Let's go Shitas Rav Meir. You are mevashel b'Shabbos b'mezid. You and no one else can eat the food. No one will eat the food. You don't have to tell a person to throw it away. When it comes to planting of a tree, the tree, if you won't uproot it, that's going to last for the next 100 years. But to say no one can eat from the tree, so then there's a big fear that people at some point will end up eating from the fruits of the tree. There you have to go further. The mezid, you have to be yakar. Here at least it makes sense why Rabbi put noitea in its own group, because it's not just yoichal lo yoichal. Can you leave the tree or do you have to uproot the tree?
Wait, can you uproot it and then replant it?
I don't.
Wait a little while.
The Kavan was asking if you planted a tree on Shabbos, not planted a sapling that became a tree. If you planted a already baby tree and you have to uproot it, l'chayda, you can replant it. I don't think the tree itself became a problem.
Right.
Good question. Now, finally, says the Mishnah that when it comes to the dinim of Shavi'is, if you think you're running away from Masechta Shvi'is, here we go right back. Shvi'is is even more chamor than Shabbos. Midrabanan, and that is that if a person plants a tree on Shvi'is, here we say bein shoigig bein mezid. Regardless, you have to uproot the tree yakard. We'll see. The Gemara will speak about this sugya of why is Shvi'is more chamor than Shabbos. It's a loaded Mishnah, but let's go back to the beginning. The first din of the Mishnah was the chiddush that you cannot lechatchila betoidem min hatohoid al hatame, and the question is why. And again, L'Rambam, this is a biblical source. According to the Rishonim that we're going to follow from now on, the Rashi's opinion, it's a Derabanan, but the Chachamim wanted to find, as we say, an asmachta source in the Torah. So we're always coming back. We're not always. This is how many times did we already have? I didn't count. I think 7 or 8 times already that we're going back to the pasuk that we have in Koirach regarding Ma'aseh Rishon and the commandment on the Levi to separate from it Trumas Ma'aseh. So says the Gemara, Ein Tormin min hatoir. What's the source? Says Rabbi Yochanan, b'shem Rabbi Yanai. When it says v'nechshav lochem trumaschen kadogon min hagoyden v'chameleya min hayokev, that even though you're not giving truma gedoyla, but when you give to the coin 10% of what you received, God will consider it for you as if you gave it from the threshing floor. By the way, the threshing floor is a product that's complete. Yakev is the vat in which you put wine. Both says Rabbi Yanai b'shem Rabbi Yanai that since the Torah gives 2 examples, it would be like Dagon from the Goyden and Maleya min Hayakev. Why do you have to give 2 examples? It will be as if you gave Dagon min Hagoyden, or it would be as if you gave Truma Gedoyla from the Yakev. From the Yekev, depends how you pronounce it. If it's the middle of the pasuk, if it's at the okay. So says Rabbi Yanai that my Yekev, it has to go in that direction. Like we mentioned before in the words of introduction, that one of the huge differences between liquid and solids is liquids are always considered to be one unit. If you have one vat, I don't care how large the vat is, if any part of it is tamei, all of it will be tamei. When it comes to a goyden, when it comes to a pile of grain on a threshing floor, if a source of tuma, let's say a dead rodent, let's say all of this produce became mukhshar, and now a dead rodent from the Shmoyne Shiratzim, not any dead rodent, from the 8 Shiratzim, touched a couple of kernels, the ones that had direct contact with the rodent becomes, who knows, a Rishon, because the dead rodent is an Av. The adjacent kernels, what do they become? By Chulin, they become a Sheni. And that's it. And then after that, it's Tahar. So since the Torah put them together to tell you, Ma Yekev, and therefore, when you separate Truma from the Yekev, either it's going to be Tameh for Tameh, or it's going to be Tahar for Tahar. There isn't the possibility for Tahar and Tameh from the vat. That's the key of Yekev. And the Torah Dafka gave 2 examples to the Levi to say that they have to run on the same rule. The beautiful. Af Goyden Daf Tezayin Amid Beis. Even though by a Goyden it's Efsher, that what? That you're going to have part of the pile will be Tahar and part of it will be Tameh. That's possible. But the Torah won't allow you to separate Truma from such a pile, because then it will not be like the Yekev. Because then it's either or. Either you're taking from the Tameh and the Tahar, which is really bad, right? It's not mikol chelboy. You're going to be noisech chet, or even tahoid al hatame. It's not going to be okay because it's not like the Yaakov, and that's called lemeidim efsher mishei efsher. In other words, you could have argued in the opposite direction. You could have argued that since it's not possible by the Yaakov to have both mixtures, you can't learn anything from the Yaakov. Fakert. The Torah gave two examples. Yaakov, it's only tami. There's no other possibility. It's efsher, another possibility. By the Goyden, you have various possibilities. We're making a limit by saying that why did God put together that just like the efsher becomes the teacher, the efsher, which is the Yaakov, is the case in which you will never give min hatoid alatami because it's impossible. By the Goyden, it is possible. What we say that the efsher is the teacher, the efsher is the Talmud, lemeidim efsher mishi efsher in that direction, and now we have a limud or an asmachta that you cannot give min hatoid alatami. Now that you have a source, whether again lerambam lerash ma'ato lo yehei truma say truma. So the chayda take the source all the way. The God is telling you how to do it. Why would that not imply that if you didn't do it the way God said to do it, it should be ineffective? And by the way, it's not that common that you have midoiraisa lechatchila b'diavad. It's not the only scenario. There are other cases, but it's not the rule. Normally, lechatchila b'diavad is like a siman. It's only a rabbinic law. Normally. But regardless, why don't we use it all the way? So the Gemara says because we have another word, and this is also a pasuk in Parshas Koirach. And I would like to read the word mimenu. If you look inside your Torah Or Hasholem, it says ve'el haLeviim tedaber ve'yomartu aleim ki sikhu me'ez bnei Yisrael es ha'maiser asher nasati lochem me'itom benachloscham v'harimoisem mimenu trumas Hashem maiser min ha'maiser v'harimoisem mimenu is extra. Torah could have written v'harimoisem, that the Levi should make a harama, truma, hafrasha, and havdalah. No, mimenu is a inclusive term. Mimenu, the extra word mimenu teaches you that even when truma was separated improperly, but they did it, mimenu, they did it, it's done. And Chazal knew where to apply this inclusive mimenu to our case, because at the end of the day, you're giving the kohen tahor. It makes sense. If you want to include, this is the best case to include. Okay. And now, like we mentioned, in the Bavli, the Gemara would have said that it's unusual to say, in Eino inyan lezeh, teneyu inyan lezeh. Was if there's a din, and the din is written, in our case, there's a rule that's taught in Trumas Meiser. The source of the din, that ein toiremen min hatoir alatame, now we just learned, is from Trumas Meiser. Happens to be that by Trumas Meiser, you could give min hatoir alatame. We'll see next year, maybe you have to give. Because why would you give the coin tame? So how ironic is it that the source is in Trumas Meiser? We don't apply that rule to Trumas Meiser, but we apply it to Truma Gedoyla. It's normally the rule is Kol Hadvarim Lemeidim Umalamdim. When Hashem writes something in an area, first it teaches you primarily in that area. Like what should have been is, if this means we have both Goyden and Yaakov, we have the limit, and the rule of Lemeidim Efsher and Mishii Efsher, not on the other way around, and we don't keep them separated. All of that, well, that is by Trumas Meiser. So the rule should first and foremost should have been Trumas Meiser should not be given, at least lechatchila, min hatoir alatame. And then we say, since Masroi Seichem, we already had that, the Torah puts it in the plural, so we compare all of the Trumais together. No, but that's not what's happening over here. That's the irony. Normally, lemeidim umalamdim. However, Trumas Meiser, he milamedes, it's only the teacher. It teaches you the rule of Torah, alatame, at least lechatchila, no, but it teaches it only to someone else, to Truma Gedoyla. But ve'ena lameida, but it doesn't allow itself to be a student. And b'chlal, the rule by a teacher is if the teacher wants to inspire the Talmud, you got to practice what you preach, as they say. Here, we're not practicing what you're preaching. Now, it's not a checkmate question. It's just an observation that this is something very unusual. And again, we're going to see that there are two dinim that concerning our topic, two dinim, that we say lemedim, melamdim, milamedes ve'ena lameda. And there's a third din, thank God, where we have both, lemedim umelamdim. And what are the two dinim? Let's read it inside. So says the Gemara, Trumas Meiser, first law, where we have this exception, Limda al Truma Gedoyla, that what, this din, Shaloi Teheni tell us, Min hatoid alatame. Yet, the irony, Trumas Meiser itself, Hini tell us, Min hatoid alatame. Before we go on to the second rule, how do you know? Who told you that? Now, I know when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, and when we learned it in the end of the first chapter, we gave the logic. And the logic is really the second rule. The logic is that since Truma Gedoyla has to be given min hamukaf, that's why there's a logic not to allow Tohar alatame. Since Trumas Meiser, we learned in the previous chapter, we learned last week, does not have to be given min hamukaf. So if the reason goes away, especially according to the Rash, it's a rabbinic law, if the reason goes away, adarabah, give to the kohen Tohar. But let's go inside. Now, minayin, we want to have a source in scripture. The logic is not enough. Rabbi Yosi, in the name of Rabbi Chizkiah, and Rabbi Yoina, b'shem Rabbi Yanai, Nochamol, Nochabosik that we have in Parshas Koirach, where it says, Unasata mimenu, es trumas Hashem li Aaron HaKoyen. Why do you have to mention Aaron HaKoyen? Asay sheyinosnu la'aharon HaKoyen bikehu nasoi. You make sure that what you give should be able to be used by the recipient. And the ardinim, b'negeya de kohuna and truma, which is two dinim, which is if the kohen is tamei, the kohen cannot eat truma tohira, and if the kohen is tahor, he's not allowed to consume truma tameya. See to it that what you give, he'll eat. Now, obviously, we're not talking about where the kohen is tamei. If the kohen is tamei, you can give it to him, he can't eat it. We must be speaking about a scenario that Aaron HaKohen and all the other kind of tahor, see to it that he can eat it, which means make sure you give him tahor, which actually means that when the Levi is separating Trumas Meiser, if he has tahor, he has to give min hatoir alatome. How great is that? That's one source. Kahana Amar, and sometimes Reb Kahana, sometimes Kahana Amar, when it says, again in Trumas Meiser, Mikol Chelboy, Es Migdashoy Mimenu, as kol chelboy, I'm reading the whole pasuk from Torah Yerushalmi. Mikoil matnoi sechem terimu eis kol trumas Hashem. Mikol chelboy. Chelboy, we already said, means from its best part. It's sacred from it. It's sacred from it. That's gavaldik. What does it mean? It's sacred. Give from the best. Best means that if you have toid and tamei, which would also mean chulin and kodesh, you give the kodesh. Another source, fakir, that you have to give min hatoir alatame, that is written in Trumas Meiser. That is written in Trumas Meiser. So it doesn't allow the limud that we have to compare the goyden to the yekev to be applied to Trumas Meiser, because God already revealed that Trumas Meiser has to be given min hatoir alatame. Now let's go into the second law. It's getting late. What's the second law? Trumas Meiser, limda, al Truma Gedoyla.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that last one?
Yeah, quick, let's go.
Just but Trumas Meiser, if I have Tomei Trumas Meiser, I'm not allowed to separate Tomei Trumas Meiser for other Tomei Trumas Meiser. That's what we're learning right now?
We can give Tomei on Tomei, we could give. We cannot give
Tomei
al Tahir. Correct. Now, Trumas Meiser limd al Truma Gedoyla. The din of min hamukav. That what? Shehi nitelos min hamukav. And what is the source? The Gemara doesn't say. Let's read it. Look inside the Rash, Cyrilio, the left column, 7 lines from the bottom. Milamedes al Truma Gedoyla shehi nitelos min hamukav. The Tanya b'sifri in the Medrash, when it says Baharimchem es chelboy mimenu shelo yehu troyimim elamen amuvchar loy. Min hamachuber loy. Anaya limud. That you have to give it min hamachubar. Min hamukav means it has to be all connected. Now that pasuk is written in Bamidbar Yudches and Koirach Trumas Meiser. So even though the source that you have to separate Truma, min hamukav is from words that God writes by Trumas Meiser, nevertheless, v'hini teles shaloi min hamukav. So here again, milamedes How do you know that the din of minamukov that is actually sourced in words in koirach trumas meiser? How do you know it does not apply to trumas meiser? Not the logic of it, but first you need a source. Minayin shetrumas meiser neteles shaloi minamukov, from another word that we have in trumas meiser. When Hashem writes Mikoil Masroi Seichem, extra words that you, Levi, have to give from all of your Maisres, we already know that. He's giving it from what? He doesn't own land. Of course he's giving it from it. And it's in the plural. Here we say very good, that if the Levi has Maisres in this region, in Yehuda, the Levi has a house in the Galil, he doesn't have to be here and there. As long as you know how much you have in the Galil, you can say, I have over there 50 pounds. I have over here 50 pounds. I know I have 100 pounds. I can separate 10 pounds from here for here and there. That's why the Torah writes, Mikoil Maisrei Seichem, even if they're not together, Echad B'Yudah Ve'echad B'Galil. So these are the two dinim that even though normally Lemeidim and then Melamdim, but here, no, Melamedes V'hi Ein Lameda. It happens to be that it's not always. The Gemara wants to, we're going to close this with this. The rule still stands. The rule is that normally if something is sourced in Trumas Meiser, it applies to Trumas Meiser and to Truma Gedoyla, and that will be the third rule. That Trumas Meiser limda al Truma Gedoyla, that what? Shaloi tehei nitelas ela min hagamur, which is what we learned yesterday, that when it says kadogen min hagoyden v'chemeleya min hayakef, goyden is where the product is completed. It's called the goyden. Yakev, here we have Gabriel. When the wine is in the vat, the wine is completed. That's where it's completed. It's already in the vat. It's under the pressing. It's under the, means it's a completed product. We have these words by Trumas Meiser, and indeed the rule is that the obligation to tithe is only when, that's the whole thing we learned last week, with the olives, with the oil, Gemar Malacha, and thank God, the din that you only separate from something, Shenigmar Malachtoi, applies equally. And Va'afhi, not only is that the din of Truma Gedoyla, it's the Talmud from the pasuk that's written in Trumas Meiser, but that the Rebbe, the teacher, also applies it to itself. The Afina tell us only min ha gamur. And we'll stop over here. Gewaldig. And God willing to be continued.
Shabbos.